Joining me on the show today is my dear friend, Shana Bresnahan. Shana grew up in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is a city right outside of Nashville. From the outside looking in, her family looked pretty perfect. They were very successful and well known in their community. Shana was successful in school, top of her class, even cheer captain. But in 8th grade, her whole life changed overnight when her sister revealed to the family that her father had been abusing both her and her sister. When this got out to the community and to teachers, their family was no longer loved and welcomed, and she learned at a really young age that community has the power to hurt and also to heal. In this episode, we talked about coping mechanisms, both healthy and unhealthy, that she turned to at a young age, how faith played a significant role in her healing, and the hidden blessings in the pain and trauma she endured. We discussed the power in forgiving those that hurt us, setting boundaries in relationships, and keeping a book of evidence so that we never forget how God has redeemed us from the brokenness and hardship in our lives. This is the first episode that I got really emotional in. And although it sounds like a hard topic to hear about, I promise you there's so much wisdom and goodness from this episode that if there's any pain in your heart and any unforgiveness, this is going to be a game changer for you. I can't wait for you to hear. Hey, Shana, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, friend.
I'm really excited. I know we've been trying to make this meeting happen for so long. For those of you listening, Shana, it's a good friend of mine that actually lives here locally in the Nashville area. And we are lucky enough to get together every once in a while for breakfast or lunch or something. But we've been talking about doing this podcast forever. And I'm super excited to have you here to share your story today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's so hard to coordinate, right? When you have older kids, I have younger kids, and we're both running our own businesses.
I know. Like when life is lifing, we're like, how can we get some breakfast in?
Yeah.
So I know we have some pretty serious and heavy things to talk about today, but I want our audience to know that there's a beautiful story, a beautiful outcome on the other side of this. So as you're listening in today, I'm excited to, not excited to like share all the awfulness, but like sharing what you've been through and then what life looks like today, I think is going to give people a lot of hope. And so I think this is going to be a really fantastic episode for people to listen to. So let's just start with childhood, right? Like tell me about Shana's childhood and what life was like for you.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think I grew up in Brentwood, which is just outside of Nashville, but it's like this like Brentwood bubble, if you will. And from the outside looking in, we kind of had this perfect little life. My mom, my dad, it was me and my sister, lots of pets. I was, successful in school, top of my class, cheerleading, all the things. And, I lived that like popular girl life. We would have said we were a Christian family. I had a Precious Moments Bible on my bookshelf, so that classified me as a Christian. I live in the Bible Belt, but we didn't go to church or anything like that. I didn't really understand why I wasn't allowed to go to church as a kid. I just knew that was something my dad was not a fan of, was church. So yeah, that was pretty much like childhood seemed really great. Like I felt like I had it all together, and from the outside looking in, we seemed to have it all together. I mean, there was a little bit of history where my dad had been married previously. He had 3 kids, my brother and my 2 sisters, and my one of my sisters was killed by a drunk driver 3 days before I was born, and then my brother was in a tragic track accident a year after I was born and became a complete vegetable. So even around town, like we were known for that as well. There was we were a family that had been in the Brentwood community for a long time, well known in the Brentwood community. Right. And I was the youngest of the group of 5.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the Brentwood bubble, people who don't live here, like it literally, this area, it's like a super safe area and everybody knows each other and, like life is good here and all these things. And so like you were saying, from the outside looking in, life looked good, except there was a lot of loss and tragedy in your guys' life as well. And I'm sure that had an impact on all of you in ways that were visible and weren't visible.
Yeah. And there was more that we would discover later that we didn't know. Our parents, my sister Felicia and I, that were raised together because we were the closest in age, there was more that we would learn that they were hiding from us that we would discover later, which was kind of fascinating because I think our whole family obviously knew the truth and withheld the truth from us. So I feel like I was shielded from a lot of what was going on. But as a kid, although you are not necessarily experiencing the impact of the loss and the tragedy and the secrecy that was happening in our family, it you feel it, right? You feel
Yeah.
it emotionally. You know that you're not experiencing that connection you should with your parents. You know that there's a safety that's missing, although you can't quite pinpoint what exactly that is. And looking back as an adult, I'm like, whoa, man, there was so much going on behind the scenes in my own home,
Mm.
in my own family that I was completely oblivious to. But I think as parents try to protect their kids from things and people around them try to protect them, what they don't recognize is that it's actually creating this like deep connection gap.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that around 8th grade-ish, some things happened and things started to change for you. So take us back to that time.
Yeah, it was like an overnight switch. I was the captain of the cheerleading squad, straight A student. As far as everybody knew, like living this perfect little Brentwood life. And I still remember my sister and my dad were fighting, which wasn't uncommon. And my sister got really mad, and she revealed in front of me and my mom and my dad that my dad had been abusing her and me. That was a secret that I had told my sister, and never knew that it was happening to her. I kind of figured it was because it was happening to me, but it changed everything overnight. So it was a complete bombshell that she just dropped in the middle of our living room, literally. And I went to school the next day. I was cheerleading for a basketball game after school, and I remember my mom coming late to the game, and she never was late to the game. And she said, "He's gone." And that was the day that everything changed. So, my dad went to jail. He ended up in prison eventually.
Your mom turned him in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was prosecuted by the district attorney. And, so that led to, eventually my parents getting divorced. My dad ended up in prison after a couple of trials and having to testify against him. And it changed things for my sister, which we can talk about. But for me, I went from like this popular girl with all the friends and everything together to not being invited to the sleepovers anymore because my family's story was in the paper. And they were all reading in the paper about my family. And because my dad was out on, parole or whatever, like he was out in between the trial and when he first got arrested, nobody felt safe with me in their house. So, and being the perfect little community that Brentwood is, nobody wanted to associate with us. The little community that we did have was pretty much lost. And so my mom who was a very successful real estate agent at the time, went into severe depression, agoraphobia, wouldn't leave the house, struggled to function. And it's insane how quickly everything just flipped upside down and I was living in a new reality.
Wow. How long were you keeping the secret that this was happening before it was revealed?
I mean, it's kind of challenging to say because people, if you've ever dealt with abuse, especially, sexual abuse by an authority figure in your life, you justify in your head, is it or is it not, right? And so oftentimes people think it's just a very blatant act that happens, but usually It's these little acts over time that gradually get worse and worse. And because you trust this person, you often don't even realize what's happening. You know that you feel uncomfortable, you know that something's not right, but you can't just draw a line and be like, "Oh, I am being abused," especially as a child.
Yeah.
So it happens gradually over time. And I'm so grateful to my sister because I still remember the day that she came to me and said, "If dad ever does anything like this to you, you tell me."
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, wait, he has. He
Oh, wow.
has done that." But as a child, you don't know. And that's the hard part about the manipulation and things like that that happen, is that so many children and even adults can convince themselves that there's nothing wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did your whole business is in the streets for everybody to know. Brentwood isn't a huge area, and especially back then when this happened, it was even smaller than it is now. Um, what was that like as you're going through this in eighth, ninth grade, and going to high school and kind of losing a lot of friends? Like, I'm just curious how, like, where your mind was at during that time and what you were doing to get through the day.
Um, you know, I went to this kind of achiever personality where I was going to stuff my feelings and I was going to take care of everybody. So my
Mm.
sister, during all of this, my sister ended up getting pregnant at 16, which in Brentwood is like they stuff you in another school. I mean, it's like literally
Hide you away.
Yeah, they hide you away. So she got pregnant at 16. My mom, was struggling with mental health issues. And I was very lonely. We didn't have community. We didn't really have support. And so during the day, I would function. I would take care of, people. Once Ashlyn, my then niece, was born, I would help take care of her. I would get good grades. Was in all the advanced placement classes. I would do my work. And then I would cry myself to sleep at night. And I remember just like at night going into my bedroom and just weeping by myself because I knew I couldn't let that weakness out during the day
Mm.
because I had so many responsibilities and so many things to take care of. And then on the weekend, I just drank myself into an oblivion, starting the summer after 8th grade. I had some friends that I could walk to their house, and that's what we did. We just drank and partied. And eventually, because of my sister, I still remember we went on an 8th grade trip and my sister was pregnant at the time, and there was this situation. I broke the rules, right? I snuck out. I was hanging out with friends. And I still remember they told my mom we found her with her clothes on. And my mom was so mad because they made an assumption about me, although my character previous to that had never indicated any behavior like that. And that was communicated at school. They announced at school that I was caught sneaking out.
Wow.
They banned me from the 8th grade dance. I was a part of this like talent group. They banned me from participating in that. And literally it went from Shana, our, star student, or the captain of our cheerleading squad, to like, oh, she's this whore. She
Right.
has to be this. And because of what had happened with my dad, because my sister was pregnant at 16. And so eventually I just started to kind of become that. Like, okay, you're going to give me this identity. Sure, I'll live up to that. I'll, party and drink. And, I thought for me, like, oh, well, I'm just sleeping with my boyfriend. So I'm better than everybody else because I'm not getting that drunk and I'm not sleeping around. And
Right.
so I started to really justify a lot of the behavior, but I didn't realize then that it was all for me. It was a coping mechanism. It was, essentially trying to live up to that identity that they'd given me.
Right. Yeah. Everybody had decided for you who you were, and you just bought it.
Which
Went
I
along
think
with it.
so many people can relate to. Like
Yeah.
looking back, you were the class clown or you were the jock or,
Yeah.
you were the bully. And it's like, okay, if
Yeah.
that's who you expect me to be, that's who I'll become. Whether you consciously know that or not, subconsciously you start to, these adults especially give you an identity, and you just start to subconsciously live up to it.
Well, so often as parents, like sometimes we say things to our children that we don't even realize we're basically attaching an identity to them and making them believe something about themselves. We have such influence in that way, not just our parents, but our peers, have influence. And we start to believe the things that they tell us who we are instead of, especially when you're really young and impressionable, but even as adults, I feel like struggle with that when people see you a certain way or have a certain opinion about you. It's very difficult sometimes to know who your true self is, who your identity really is. And especially as a kid, that had to have been really hard.
Yeah. And we don't give ourselves permission to have seasons of broken identity.
Mm. Wow. That's really good. Seasons of broken identity. What does, that was really good. I'm like, ooh, I want to go deeper on that. Yeah. Let's talk about that. What does that mean to have a season of broken identity?
For me as a believer, our true identity is our identity in Christ and who God has created us to be. And ultimately that radiant person that comes out when we're looking upon him. And at the end of the day, we will all get lost. We will all have seasons where we look for our life meaning, our life purpose, and our identity in other things, whether that be, like for me, it was relationships with boys for a long time. For some people, it's their success in their career. For some people, it's who they are as a mother. Like, I was just watching this reel yesterday of a mom who has had like 4 kids, and she's been able to breastfeed all of them. This last kid, she's not able to breastfeed. And so losing that season and that identity of being a nursing mom, she's really, really grieving that.
Mm.
And so I think when we put our identity in anything other than who we are in Christ and who we are as a child of God and beloved, it's a season of broken identity. And the problem is that when we live in that, the world starts to tell us, this is who you are. This is who you are. You are a successful business person. So if something happens that tells me I'm not successful, then it's a big problem for me, because then I am no one. I don't have an identity anymore. I am lost.
Yeah.
Right. And then most of us go to fill that identity in something otherworldly, but all the worldly things will eventually break. They will always be temporary. You can never hold on to any worldly identity. So for me, any season of broken identity is when who I believe that I am and my value and my worth is coming from something worldly other than just I am beloved. I'm a radiant creature and I have gifts to bring into this world. And, as imperfect as I may be, I am worthy and beloved. And so that to me is like what broken identity means. And I've gone through all sorts of seasons as a child and as an adult of putting my identity in things that aren't worth putting my identity in.
Yeah. For those that aren't on camera, I got a little emotional listening to you say that. And because going through a divorce, I feel like really broke me and challenged me, where I had to figure out who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And not only who I was after divorce, but who I had lost during a very painful marriage, and who I'm still trying to figure out today. So, yeah, that really resonated with me, that season of brokenness. But I think you so beautifully encapsulated it and brought it back to, like, those are seasons, right? They don't determine our entire life.
Right.
They don't define who we are. And it's completely normal for us to go through these temporary seasons of brokenness, as long as we find our way back to who we really are and who God says that we are. And in the quicker we can get back to that truth, I feel like is when true growth and healing can happen.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that for me, that season of brokenness lasted for a long time, right? So 8th grade, all of this went down. And my sophomore year, I went to church with some friends and really accepted Christ for the first time for me, which at the time was like, what? I didn't understand this idea of a God that loved me in my brokenness. And I still remember running out of that youth group room, hiding, because this is what I did. I hid when I was vulnerable, hiding on the staircase and just bawling my eyes out because I had this overwhelming feeling of being loved. And I knew as a kid, sometimes I would lay in bed and cry myself to sleep and I didn't feel alone. And I couldn't explain it, but I didn't feel alone. And I knew that those two things were connected. And that hit me so hard, but nothing changed in my life after that. You know, you hear people be like, I became a Christian and then, I stopped drinking and I stopped sleeping with my boyfriend and I stopped I didn't, nothing looked different other than I had this curiosity about God. I desired and wanted to live differently, but I really wasn't because I was so wrapped in to this life. But it was the summer after my freshman year of college, which is an interesting time because literally my mom filed bankruptcy when I was in senior year. So we lost our home, we lost everything my senior year right before college. And I was financially, kind of supporting myself, helping support my mom, Ashlyn, all the things. I had no money to get home from college to put gas in my gas tank. And my friend said, well, why don't you just go to this retreat that I'm helping lead and, whatever. So I went on this retreat thinking, no big deal. And I still remember they have you write, if you grew up in a Christian home, you probably had to do this at some point. They have you write on a paper heart, all the things that you want to nail to the cross. And they have this cross at the front of the room. You're going to nail these things to the cross. I remember writing down there, my dad's abuse, my mom's mental illness, my sister's, abandonment of Ashlyn, just writing all these things down. I just sat there and cried. All these little obedient Christian kids walked up, nailed it to the cross. I sat there till 1 a.m. And this pastor, who I now know was an ex-inmate, sat next to me quietly and just waited. And through those 3 days, God completely broke me. And what he taught me was, he's like, look, you can take the broken pieces of your life and you can hold on to them and they're going to continue to cut you and wound you the rest of your life. Or you can give them to me and I will turn them into a beautiful mosaic of stained glass. And when my light shines through them, you're going to see something more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Right? Yeah. But
beautiful.
You have to let go and you have to forgive.
Yeah. That's got to be hard to forgive. He's asking you to forgive something really, really painful.
Yeah. And honestly, it surprises most people that I have a relationship with my dad today because he hasn't really apologized. He doesn't really admit what he did. In a roundabout way, he'll kind of say, if this ever, but there's never been a genuine apology. And I still remember talking to another pastor and saying he did a sermon on forgiveness. And I'm like, this is BS. This whole forgiveness stuff is BS. And I came up to him afterwards and I said, I need to understand, how do you forgive somebody who doesn't admit that what they did is wrong? And they hurt you so deeply, it changed the entire trajectory of your life. Yeah. And he said, forgiveness is not forgetting and forgiveness is not reconciliation. But holding on to unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting on the other person to die. Yeah. It's only going to hurt you. Yeah. So if you're able to forgive, not in the worldly kind of forgiveness, but in I release you from this because I'm releasing me from this because it is not my punishment to give to you, then you experience it in a freedom you can never experience. And that pastor looked at me and knowing my story, he actually shared with me that he had not shared with people before that he was abused by a family member and struggled with the same thing. He did a sermon soon after that, sharing for the first time ever his story of abuse. And later, that family member would be on his deathbed and they would ask him to come and pray for that family member.
Wow. Forgiveness is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I mean, it feels unnatural, right? It feels someone violated me, someone that I trust, someone that I love, someone who was supposed to be a protector of me, especially in the situation that you were in, where that's just like the ultimate violation that a parent can do to a child. And it does. It changes your life forever. When a child experiences abuse, it changes their life forever. And it feels so unfair because they didn't have a choice in it. There was nothing they could do about it. It wasn't their fault, like none of that. And so it feels like so unfair. And so I can see how many people would hold on to unforgiveness around that, because it does. It can feel like forgiveness is saying, it's okay, right?
Mhm.
It's okay what you did.
Yeah, it's acceptance.
Yeah, it's acceptance. And I think that it's what you said about it not being, it doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean that you have to reconcile and have this great relationship with that person if you don't want to. But it really is, if anybody is listening and they're holding on to unforgiveness, I think if they really sat down and thought about it, the unforgiveness is a weight and a pain that is continuing to allow, like they themselves are continuing to suffer over and over and over again from whatever was done to them. And it just like prolongs and drags out the pain and suffering for yourself. It's like, not only were you violated, but now it's just dragging it out and it's impacting you forever. And so the forgiveness isn't about telling the other person it's okay or making them feel better. It's really about you stopping the cycle of suffering, you stopping the pain of whatever was done to you and saying, I'm releasing this. I'm letting this go. I'm no longer allowing this to hold me down in my life and determine my future. Right. And so forgiveness is all about freedom for the person who was violated.
Yeah. And they don't even have to know that you forgive them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't have to have a conversation.
Right. I chose to take that step because when my husband and I were having our first child, that was kind of the question of, will my dad be involved? I also really wanted a relationship with my grandmother because my dad's family was actually the family I was closest to growing up, except for they all abandoned us, even though they knew my dad's character, because this wasn't the first time that this had happened. Even though they knew that, they abandoned us. And so I wanted to restore that relationship with my grandmother, but my dad was living with my grandmother at the time. So I made the choice to share that I was forgiving him, which, led to a deeper conversation and actually writing letters back and forth, which made it very clear to me that this man is never going to and he's never going to admit, but I didn't tell him with the expectation of something from him. And I think that's the other key part of it, and it wasn't just him. My sister that I was raised with, Felicia, who had the daughter, we found out actually when my dad was going through trial that we had different dads. My sister was actually a couple years old when my parents met. They had given us names to hide the fact that he wasn't hers. I mean, she was 16 when she found out that her dad wasn't her real dad.
Wow.
And so there was so much secrecy among so many people that I had to release, even knowing that my siblings before us had been abused, but that whether it had or hadn't been communicated, beside the point, right? But there's this cycle and this history that I can point to all of these people and go, if one of you had done X, Y, Z, maybe this wouldn't have happened to me. Yeah. But thinking that way is so unhealthy. But it took me a long time to recognize that.
Yeah. There's so much betrayal that happened within your family that it'd be really easy to just write them all off, right? My grandmother wants to, disassociate with me because of what I, came about my father. Fine. Right. My dad did this to me. I'm done with him. My mom, what's happening with her, done with her. Like, it's so easy. Not easy, actually, that's the wrong word, but it would be common, and it would actually feel normal response to be like, I have to remove these people from my life. And what they did to me was the ultimate betrayal and hurt, and they're not even acknowledging it. And so I'm walking away from them. And you actually did the opposite. You wanted to reconcile with your grandmother. You have a relationship with your father. So talk to me about where your mind was at in that, and how you even got to the point where you could have a relationship with your father, especially, who did abuse you, doesn't admit to it, hasn't said he's sorry. Like, how in the world do you get to the place where you have a relationship like that?
I mean, I hate to be like the cheesy Christian. Like, I really do. But honestly, um, the more I get close to God, the more I read the Bible, I read through it a couple times, the more I realize like just how sinful I am too. Like there is no scale that compares sin and brokenness. When we look at it, we are all trying to survive. We are all just trying to function in this broken world. And I know some of my dad's history. I know the history he had with his parents and what he saw with his dad. I know my mom's history of growing up in the projects, her dad abandoning her, her mom having severe mental illness and her taking care of her. I know those stories, and everyone has one. Everyone has a story. And those stories, unfortunately, that toxicity in our life can lead to making really, really bad decisions. And so sometimes I look at them and I just go, I want to see your brokenness, because your brokenness is what led to this. Your brokenness is what led to your brokenness, or to my brokenness. And that goes back to that we talk about, like, that God makes us beautiful vessels when we're first born, but over time that just gets shattered into these like sharp edges of glass, and we can hold on to them. And not only are we going to continue to cut and hurt ourselves, but we're going to cut and hurt other people too.
Yeah.
And my family, they were not believers. Some of them would say that they were, but I never saw fruit. I never saw evidence of them really walking with the Lord. And so why am I surprised? Why am I surprised that hurt and broken people are hurting other people and leading to more brokenness in other people's lives? And what's going to change that is me being somebody who's working on a path towards healing, that's working on a path towards, hopefully shining God's light into the world. And is me abandoning them? What is that going to teach them? Is that going to create opportunity for generational change? No, it's not. So, at the end of the day, like, God calls us to step into hard places and to love in situations that seem unlovable. And there's so many beautiful things that have been redeemed. My mom has since become a believer. At my sister's first daughter is now our daughter. We adopted her when she was 13. And there's just been this beautiful picture that God is weaving together. And I don't know, what he'll do with those relationships, but like, I know there are some sweet memories and some sweet moments that I cherish and hold on to, and that my kids cherish and hold on to, that we never would have had if we would have just abandoned those relationships. And honestly, I know my life. I know how I've treated people. Maybe in the world's eyes, my abuses haven't been as egregious, but if everybody who I have ever hurt or wronged wrote me off, I would be a pretty lonely person too, So I don't know. I guess you just have to make a decision at the end of the day. Like, am I going to write these people off? What's going to benefit of that versus, am I going to continue to show up? Now, I will say this, because that can sound very toxic. There are very, very strong boundaries, very strong boundaries that are discussed, that are upheld. There are things I'll talk about, things I won't talk about. I won't be around my dad in certain situations. My kids will never be alone with my dad. There are definitely very healthy and strong boundaries in place. But we do what we can to maintain and restore a relationship where possible.
Yeah. I think that, what you said, like, we've all been broken at some point in time in our lives. We've all not shown up as our best self sometime in our lives. We've all hurt other people. And if we write off every person that's ever hurt us, like you said, we'd probably end up very alone. If people who've hurt us are people who we've hurt. And you mentioned boundaries, and I want to talk a little bit more about that, because there are people that are listening that are saying, well, if I keep a relationship with that person who has hurt me, they're just going to keep hurting me and keep hurting me and keep hurting me. And that's not what you're saying at all. And so, with the relationship you have with your father, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what that relationship looks like, as much as you're comfortable with it. And then the boundaries, you mentioned a couple of them now, but like, how did that come about in even being able to be near him and be in the same room with him, share your family with him, share your life with him, but then create these boundaries that don't allow him to continue to ever violate you in the way that he did in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was many years, honestly, before I could restore that relationship, because my heart wasn't in the right place. Like, God had to do a lot of work on me, and had to get me to a place where I felt secure and independent. There's a lot of relationships, actually. Like my brother passed away my senior year of high school. And that's a relationship that I missed out on because I wasn't independent, if you will, at that point, to go build relationship with him as much as I could. And so there's a maturity that comes. I think there's a wisdom that comes. And then there's just a peace that God gave me about the timing. I needed to say some things to him. And I wanted to wait until not just myself, but my husband was ready as well. Because being somebody who is married, anytime you enter into a relationship with somebody, they are entering into a relationship with somebody as well. Yeah. And my husband, as you can imagine, had lots of thoughts about my dad. And because, my past has impacted our marriage as well. So he feels the ripple effect of that. So he had to be ready too. And there was a fear for him, right? Of, would I be able to protect my wife if something were to happen?
Yeah.
So we had to get to a place where we knew we were ready together. And I think having him and knowing that I had that security would be a big key in being able to be around my dad. I remember at my brother's funeral, it was my sister's husband, my brother-in-law, who stood by me when my dad walked up and protected me. And I having those people that can be with you so that you don't become that vulnerable child again, you know that you are secure, to me has been a real key. Yeah. So it's always, when we first started, it was at my grandmother's house because I wanted a relationship with her. So it was always in the company of others, which was really helpful. And he has since remarried as well. So his now wife is always in our company. My husband knows, which was important to talk to him, where I would say, don't ever leave me alone. So, this, you're not my dad isn't going to come over and then you're going to go upstairs on a phone call for 15 minutes. Right. That we're not going to do. Yeah. So over time, we've just been able to adjust the boundaries. And then obviously once we had kids, that boundary was just super clear. Like, we will always be in the room. We will always, we'll always be present in that. And if you ask me, do I think my dad would ever try anything with me or my kids? No, I don't. I think, I hope that those days are long gone for him. Right. But it's really important just to have those simple boundaries. And there's lots of things that different family members that we don't share, we don't share certain aspects because, that person is not a safe person to hold that space for whatever that is that we are walking through. Yeah. And sometimes you have to learn that the hard way. But I think the mistake that a lot of people make, and that I've made before in my life, is because somebody can't handle all of us and can't be a safe person for all of us, then we think they can't be a safe person for any part of me. They can't be in my life at all. But it's up to us. I mean, even Jesus had his inner 3, his 12, his, larger group. Yeah. It's up to us to have the wisdom to know how deep we go in relationships and what boundaries we uphold, whether we've been hurt by that person or not. That's just a wisdom that I feel like I've developed over time and still am learning on the regular.
Yeah, I want to point out what you said, that like it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? It doesn't have to be I have this great relationship with this person or I have no relationship with this person. Like
Right.
there can be layers, there can be phases, there can be boundaries, and so even for me thinking about that, I think a lot of people sometimes can just write somebody off 100%. And if there is a way to safely have some kind of boundary or baby steps or some kind of connection, and it can be healthy, then it can be a really good thing. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to give them full access to you and your life, but it also doesn't mean that you have to completely remove them.
Yeah, but either way, like that, there are people who are not safe people.
Yeah.
Period. Like that you can't be around. And that is
Yeah.
okay, but you can still forgive. You can still release that.
Yeah.
Because again, that in releasing that, that's where you experience freedom and you get to live your life fully in who God created you to be. But when you're holding on and drinking that poison of that unforgiveness and that grudge that you're holding, like that just, man, it just darkens and dampens your spirit.
Yeah. So looking back now, that you have your own family, multiple children, had one on the way, all the things that you've been through. There's a lot. There's a lot of loss in your life. There's been a lot of tragedy. There's been a lot of hardship. There's been a lot of pain. If you could look back now and say, here's what number one helped me get through it most of all, and number two, what is maybe an unexpected blessing that you can look back now and say, this really ugly thing turned out to be something beautiful?
Well, the most unexpected blessing by far is my faith. I don't know, like literally people who know my story, that even there's a lot more that we haven't talked about, but they're like, how did you become a person of faith? And I think literally it was the hardships that I walked through that brought me to that point where there was nobody else to turn to. So that for sure is the biggest blessing. And then the second biggest blessing is our oldest child, who is about to turn 24, is married, has her own little, and is the little baby that was in my sister's belly when she was testifying against my dad. My, when we got her when she was 13, and then my sister ended up passing away her senior year. So she's fully ours. And that has been a huge challenge and a huge blessing to raise teenagers and toddlers at the same time, for sure. But the lessons I've learned through caring for her and walking through her with her own tragic story, it is having gone through things like that myself and done the work, the counseling, the therapy, the faith walk to heal from so much of that, had given me the ability to support her through many tough years in her life that I wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
And when I sit and think about all that I have walked through and how I've gotten through it, honestly don't know. I don't know. I wish there was some factor that I could say. I think for me, it has been constantly being curious about what God is teaching me, looking for his fingerprints in everything, praying for things that feel stupid to pray for, but then he shows up in a really big way. And in the Old Testament, there's all these stories of God doing pretty miraculous things. And oftentimes they say, build an altar. You hear them like, oh, we built an altar here, or so-and-so was at the altar of whatever. But they keep talking about building these altars. And throughout the Old Testament, they also talk about remembering God's faithfulness. They talk about it in the New Testament as well, but really in the Old Testament. And what they're saying is build physical reminders of God's faithfulness in your life, because you will experience hard times and you will forget. You will forget what he has brought you through. You will forget what he has taught you, what he has done for you. So recite it over and over again. That's why they stood and they literally would read out loud to the people over and over again the story of God rescuing them from Egypt and parting the Red Sea. right? They would read these stories over and over again because we forget. And when we forget, we live differently. We live like people who aren't loved. We live like people who don't have provision. We live like people who don't have an identity. And so journaling and constantly just recounting and remembering God's faithfulness in my life, instead of focusing on all the tragic things that have happened and all the things that could have happened differently, just going, but look at how he's shown up. Look at how he's provided. Look at how he plucked me out of this situation. Look at what he's done to restore this. Look at what good has come from that. That to me, like, that's what keeps me in a place of hope. That's what keeps me in a place of hope for myself, for others. And, you know, when hard times come, I have those altars to look back on that remind me of whose I am, so that I know I have a strong future.
Yeah. You said that so beautifully. And that what you just said, one of our resilience factors is building a book of evidence. And what you just basically put together was a beautiful way to keep track of all of the ways that God has redeemed brokenness and hardship and everything that he's helped bring you through, and the goodness that came from it and the blessings. It's not just documenting the hard things that he got you through, but also the redemption and the second chances and all the things that came from it. And God never wastes our pain. Sometimes we waste our pain, but our pain is never intended to be wasted. It's meant to turn into a purpose that can have impact for others. And you definitely are a vision of that and a walking proof of that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I not always, but try to be.
Yeah. Shana, this was really, really great interview. I think you're the first person who's made me cry.
Sorry.
But I'm just so thankful for what you shared. And I think that what you said is going to make a huge impact for people to get some freedom from the pain that they've been holding on to, and be able to walk into something that feels lighter and more free and in alignment with who God created them to be. Thank you.
I hope so. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode. This story was a remarkable testament to human resilience, courage, and perseverance. To help you manage the ups and downs of your own life journey, I have a special gift for you called the Resilience Playbook. This free guide includes 12 resilience factors that gave me hope, inspiration, and empowerment during some of my darkest times. Whether you're navigating the ups and downs of a relationship, maybe you're facing unexpected twists in your career or your business, or you're tackling personal health challenges, whatever that challenge is in your life today, this playbook will equip you with the tools you need to strengthen your resilience muscle. To get your copy, find me on Instagram and send me a DM with the words playbook, or you can simply click the link in the show notes. Before we part ways today, I want to remind you that you can do hard things, and that strength lies within you, just waiting to be unveiled. I hope you'll carry the lessons shared today with you as you grow, evolve, and strengthen your resolve. If you enjoyed this episode, be a good friend and share it with someone you know could use it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. Until next time, take care, my friend.